Howdy everyone, and today I have a lens which I've wanted to handle for a very long time, the Canon 85mm f1.2 USM 2L. This lens has a reputation for being the holy grail for portrait and wedding photographers, partly due to its handy 85mm focal length, which can emphasize your subject so nicely, but mostly due to its extremely impressive maximum aperture of f1.2. That means it lets in twice as much light as an f1.8 lens and can give you backgrounds which are twice as blurry. The blur potential of this lens is extreme, which is one of the reasons it makes an excellent portrait lens. But as you can see, it takes a lot of glass to let in so much light, and obviously it has to be very high quality glass, resulting in a very expensive lens. Even considering how useful it could be, is this lens really worth £1,500? Firstly, as befits any Canon L lens, it's built to the highest standards. The lens is very solid and tightly assembled, feeling quite weighty in your hand. The front element is absolutely beautiful. You will definitely want to get a high quality UV filter to protect it. The focus mechanism on this lens is pretty unusual. It's electronically coupled to the camera, so there's a motor inside which keeps up with the way you turn the focus ring. As a result, you can only focus when your lens is attached to a camera that's turned on. I can reassure you that the focus mechanism is actually very quick and precise. It's surprisingly responsive. This system gives you an extremely smooth and quite loose focus ring, which is a pleasure to use and can give you very nice focus pulls while you're video making. The focus path is extremely long with this lens, which means you can focus very precisely, which is important in an f1.2 lens. The autofocus is silent and very accurate, but also fairly slow. That's kind of understandable considering the huge glass elements it has to move around. The main thing is that it's accurate, which it is. Overall, it's a simple lens which works as perfectly as you could hope. The main thing, however, is image quality. First, let's see how it performs on a full-frame camera, in this case a 20-megapixel Canon 6D. I recently reviewed this lens's similar cousin, the 50mm f1.2L, and it didn't completely blow me away. Well, I'm glad to say that the 85mm is much better. In fact, it's really impressive. With the aperture wide open at f1.2, the lens is very sharp in the middle of the image, and there are good colours and contrast. There is some visible purple fringing, which is a bit of a shame, but it only really shows up on quite bright sunny days. It's when we look in the corners that we can be really impressed. Despite the wide f1.2 aperture, the corners are still fairly sharp, and there's very little chromatic aberration on contrasting edges. That's a particularly great performance. Stop the lens down to f1.8 and the corners become even sharper and brighter, and the picture quality in the middle is pretty incredible, and when we stop down again, the picture quality becomes completely perfect. It's the same good news in the corners, and chromatic aberration has disappeared. The lens remains brilliantly sharp even down to f16. Overall, the lens gives a brilliant performance on full-frame cameras. Very impressive indeed. Well, most people with the money for a camera lens like this will own a full-frame camera. But let's test it on an APS-C camera, in this case my 18-megapixel Canon 60D, where it behaves like a 136mm lens. With the aperture wide open at f1.2, the centre of the image is nice and sharp, although we do see that the purple fringing is a bit worse than it was on full frame, being quite strong. When we look into the corners of the image, we can see that they remain very sharp, especially for any camera lens at f1.2. That magenta chromatic aberration is still visible on contrasting edges, but overall, the image is really nice. At f1.8, the picture is a little brighter and clearer in the corners, and the lens is extremely sharp back in the middle, although a touch of purple fringing does remain. At f2.8, the centre of the image is perfect, and the corners look great, the chromatic aberration being cleared up. At f4, the corners are even sharper, and at f5.6 they're razor sharp. So on APS-C there are one or two issues with colour fringing, but the lens is very impressively sharp. It's a great performance. Let's take a look at vignetting and distortion. They're not really an issue on APS-C cameras, so we'll take a look at the full frame results. Thankfully, the lens doesn't seem to exhibit too much barrel distortion, but at f1.2, the corners are quite dark due to fairly strong vignetting. With the lens topped down to f1.8, the corners are much brighter, and at f2.8, they're just fine. One thing this lens struggles with, in common with other fast 85mm lenses, is longitudinal chromatic aberration. As you can see in this picture, the autofocus highlights at f1.2 are a green colour behind the plane of focus and purple in front of the plane of focus. This effect is reduced when you stop down to f2.8. On a related note, the quality of the autofocus areas on this lens, or the bokeh, is wonderful. The blurriness is very smooth and you can get plenty of it. Set the lens down to f1.2 and those backgrounds simply melt away, which is just as well because that's what you're paying for. I should tell you, I absolutely love this camera lens. You can set it to f1.2 and shoot all day long, in the happy assurance that the autofocus will be accurate and your pictures will be sharp and punchy every time. It's a lens that's supremely useful in all manner of situations, and the quality and beauty of the background will set your work out from the competition. Keep an eye on my channel for an upcoming comparison of this lens and Canon's 85mm f1.8. But just like its smaller brother, this lens comes undoubtedly very highly recommended.